The summer heat in Dallas, Texas was relentless, pressing down on the city like a heavy hand. It was April 2025, and the air buzzed with tension. Protests over police reform had flared up again after a string of controversial incidents across the country. Jasmine Crockett, a 44-year-old congresswoman, lawyer, and fierce advocate for justice, was no stranger to these battles. Her sharp wit, unapologetic voice, and unrelenting commitment to her community had made her a household name, especially in Black and progressive circles. But today, she wasn't in Washington, D.C., or addressing a crowd from a podium. She was back home in Dallas, walking through the familiar streets of Oak Cliff, where she'd grown up. Oak Cliff had always been a place of contrasts, vibrant and resilient, yet scarred by systemic neglect. Jasmine's childhood memories were a mix of block parties and police sirens, of her mother's laughter, and the whispered fears of neighbors who'd lost loved ones to violence, often at the hands of those meant to protect them. Her mother, Loretta Crockett, had been a pillar of strength, working 2 jobs as a nurse and a waitress to keep the lights on. She'd taught Jasmine early that the world didn't hand out fairness, you had to demand it. That lesson had carried Jasmine through law school at the University of Houston, through her years as a public defender, and now into the halls of Congress. Jasmine had always been a force of nature. Her law degree and her time as a public defender had honed her into a verbal sharpshooter, capable of dismantling opponents with logic and heart. Now, as a congresswoman, she carried that same fire into the halls of power. But in Oak Cliff, she was just Jas, the girl who'd never forgotten her roots. She'd come back to support a community event, a back-to-school drive organized by local activists at Greater Zion Baptist Church. The parking lot was alive with music, laughter, and the smell of barbecue. Kids darted between tables piled high with backpacks and school supplies, while volunteers handed out snow cones to beat the heat. Jasmine, dressed in a vibrant yellow sundress and sneakers, was in her element, hugging old friends and chatting with families. Her Secret Service detail, a necessity since her rising national profile, lingered discreetly nearby, their eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. The event had been months in the making, a collaboration between the church, local nonprofits, and a youth group called Future Leaders of Oak Cliff. Jasmine had helped secure funding for the drive through her congressional office, ensuring that every child in attendance would leave with a backpack, school supplies, and a sense of hope. She'd also brought in a few guest speakers, educators, poets, and a local rapper who'd made it big to inspire the kids. The energy was electric, a rare moment of joy in a community that often felt under siege. As the event wound down, Jasmine noticed a commotion at the edge of the lot. A group of teenagers, no older than 16, was arguing with a Dallas police officer. The officer, a burly man with a buzz cut and a scowl, was barking orders at the kids, his hand resting on his holster. The teens looked scared but defiant, their voices rising in protest. Jasmine's instincts kicked in. She excused herself from a conversation with Pastor Jerome Watkins, the event's organizer, and strode toward the scene, her heels clicking against the asphalt. "Excuse me, officer," she called out, her voice calm but firm. "What's going on here?" The officer turned, his eyes narrowing as he took her in. His name tag read Sergeant Daniel Hargrove. He was in his late 40s, with a weathered face and a demeanor that screamed authority or arrogance. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am," he said, his tone clipped. "Step back." Jasmine didn't budge. "It concerns me when I see kids being harassed in my community. What's the problem?" Hargrove's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a black woman in a sundress. "These kids were loitering, causing a disturbance. I'm handling it." "Loitering?" Jasmine raised an eyebrow, glancing at the teens. "They're at a community event, same as everyone else. What disturbance?" One of the boys, a lanky kid named Malik with a fade haircut, spoke up. "We weren't doing anything, Miss Crockett. He just rolled up and started yelling at us to leave." "Quiet," Hargrove snapped, pointing a finger at Malik. "You don't talk unless I say so." Jasmine stepped between Hargrove and the teens, her eyes locked on the officer. "You don't get to silence these kids. They have rights, and you're not above the law. Now explain yourself, or I'll make sure your supervisor does." The crowd was starting to gather, phones out, recording the exchange. Hargrove's face reddened, his ego bruised. He wasn't just a cop, he was a man who thrived on control, and Jasmine's defiance was a direct threat to that. "You think you're some big shot?" he growled, stepping closer. "I know who you are, Congresswoman. Doesn't mean you can disrespect me." "Disrespect?" Jasmine's voice was steady, but her eyes burned. "I'm asking for accountability. That's my job, and yours, last I checked." The tension was electric. The crowd murmured, some shouting encouragement to Jasmine, others telling Hargrove to back off. Her Secret Service agents edged closer, but Jasmine waved them off. She could handle this. She'd faced down hostile judges, corrupt politicians, and hecklers at rallies. A single officer wasn't going to intimidate her. But Hargrove wasn't thinking rationally. He was a man on edge, a product of a system that had shielded him from consequences for far too long. He'd grown up in a different Dallas, one where men like him, white, straight, and in uniform, called the shots without question. The city had changed, but Hargrove hadn't. He saw Jasmine not just as a challenge to his authority, but as a symbol of everything he resented: the shifting demographics, the calls for reform, the erosion of the power he'd once taken for granted. Then, in a moment that would change everything, Hargrove lost it. Whether it was the heat, the crowd, or Jasmine's unyielding stance, something snapped. He raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The crowd gasped. Time seemed to freeze. Jasmine stumbled back, her cheeks stinging. But she didn't fall. The pain was sharp, a burning sensation that radiated across her face, but it was nothing compared to the fire igniting inside her. Hargrove's eyes widened, as if he'd surprised even himself. The teens screamed, the crowd roared, and phones captured every second. Jasmine straightened, her hand touching her cheek. She felt the heat of the slap, the slight swelling already forming, but she refused to let it show in her demeanor. She looked at Hargrove, not with fear, but with a resolve that could move mountains. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she said, her voice low and lethal. What happened next would become the stuff of legend. Jasmine Crockett didn't need a podium or a gavel to command a room or a parking lot. She had her voice, her truth, and a lifetime of fighting for what was right. As the crowd surged forward, some ready to confront Hargrove themselves, Jasmine raised a hand, silencing them. "Stay calm," she said, her tone steady despite the chaos. "We're not sinking to his level." Hargrove, realizing the gravity of what he'd done, tried to backpedal. "You were in my face," he barked, pointing at her. "You provoked me." "Provoked you?" Jasmine's laugh was sharp, cutting through the humid air. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her eyes never leaving his. "Let me tell you something, Sergeant Daniel Hargrove. You don't get to put your hands on me, or anyone else, because your ego's bruised. You don't get to terrorize kids because you feel like it. And you damn sure don't get to hide behind that badge when you break the law." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Jasmine wasn't done. She glanced at the phone recording her, knowing this moment would go viral. She had 4 minutes. 4 minutes to dismantle Hargrove, his actions, and the system that emboldened him. She wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking to Dallas, to America, to the world. "See, this isn't just about you," she continued, her voice rising with purpose. "This is about every officer who thinks they're untouchable. Every cop who looks at a black kid and sees a threat instead of a future. Every badge that's used as a weapon instead of a shield. You slapped me, but you've been slapping this community for years, metaphorically and literally. And we're done taking it." Hargrove opened his mouth to interrupt, but Jasmine didn't give him a chance. "Don't even try it," she snapped. "You're not the victim here. Those kids you were harassing? They're the victims. The families who live in fear of your temper? They're the victims. And me? I'm just the one who's had enough." She turned to the crowd, her voice booming. "This man thinks he can silence us with a slap. But let me tell you something about Oak Cliff. We don't break. We don't bow. We rise. We fight. And we win." The crowd roared, chanting her name. "Jasmine! Jasmine!" Their voices echoing across the parking lot. Hargrove's face was a mask of fury and fear, his hands clenched at his sides. He knew he was losing control, not just of the situation, but of his career. Backup was on the way, sirens wailing in the distance, but Jasmine wasn't finished. "You want to know why you're done?" she said, turning back to him. "Because you didn't just assault a congresswoman, you assaulted the wrong woman. I've spent my life taking down bullies like you, in courtrooms, in Congress, and now right here in this parking lot. You're not just going to lose your badge, you're going to lose your legacy. When people hear your name, they won't think hero, they'll think failure. She paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd was hanging on her every syllable, their phones capturing the moment that would soon dominate every news outlet and social media platform. You had a choice today, she said, her voice softening, but no less powerful. You could have de-escalated, you could have listened, you could have been the kind of officer this city needs. But you chose violence. You chose hate. And now, you're going to face the consequences. As the sirens grew louder, Jasmine took one final step toward Hargrove, her voice dropping to a near whisper. 4 minutes. That's all it took to show the world who you really are, and who am I? The crowd exploded in applause as police cars pulled into the lot. Hargrove's colleagues approached cautiously, unsure how to handle the situation. Jasmine's Secret Service agents were now at her side, but she didn't need their protection. She'd already won. The slap heard round the world didn't just end in the parking lot. By nightfall, the video of Jasmine's confrontation with Hargrove had racked up millions of views on X, TikTok, and YouTube. Hashtags like #JasmineCrockett and Justice for Oak Cliff trended worldwide. News anchors replayed the footage, pundits debated it, and late-night hosts turned it into memes. But for Jasmine, this wasn't about fame or virality. It was about accountability. Hargrove was arrested on assault charges, a rare and swift consequence for an officer. The Dallas Police Department, under intense public pressure, placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation. But Jasmine wasn't satisfied with individual punishment. She saw Hargrove as a symptom of a larger disease, one that required systemic change. That evening, Jasmine sat in the small office of Greater Zion Baptist Church, a cold compress pressed to her cheek. Pastor Watkins, a wiry man with a salt and pepper beard, sat across from her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Jas, you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice soft. That was a lot. Jasmine managed a small smile, though it stung to move her face. "I'm fine, Pastor. I've taken worse hits, figuratively at least. But those kids—" Her voice trailed off, her mind replaying the fear in Malik's eyes, the way the other teens had huddled together as Hargrove loomed over them. They shouldn't have to live like this. They shouldn't, Pastor Watkins agreed. But what did you do out there? That gave them hope. Gave us all hope. Jasmine nodded, but her mind was already racing. She knew the arrest was just the beginning. Hargrove might face charges, but the system that had enabled him was still intact. She thought about the countless other officers who'd never been held accountable, the families who'd never gotten justice. She thought about her own mother, who'd once been pulled over for a broken taillight and humiliated by an officer who'd called her girl, despite her being in her 50s. The memories fueled her resolve. The next morning, Jasmine held a press conference outside the church, flanked by the teens from the incident, their families, and community leaders. Her cheek still bore a faint bruise, but she wore it like a badge of honor. The crowd of reporters stretched across the parking lot, their cameras flashing as she stepped up to the podium. Malik and his friends, 3 boys and 2 girls, all dressed in their Sunday best, stood behind her, their expressions a mix of pride and nervousness. "This isn't about me," Jasmine told the sea of reporters, her voice steady. "This is about every person who's been disrespected, dismissed, or dehumanized by those sworn to protect them. We're not just demanding justice for one officer's actions. We're demanding a new standard for policing, one rooted in respect, not fear." Her words struck a chord. Protests erupted across the country, not just for Hargrove's prosecution but for broader reforms, demilitarizing police, reallocating budgets to community programs, and ending qualified immunity. Jasmine became the face of the movement, though she was quick to uplift others, especially the young activists who'd been organizing for years. Behind the scenes, she was working tirelessly. She met with Malik and the other teens, ensuring they had counseling and legal support. She coordinated with local organizers to channel the public's outrage into policy proposals. And she leaned on her congressional allies to push for federal oversight of police misconduct. Her days stretched into nights, her phone buzzing with calls from supporters, critics, and everyone in between. But not everyone was on her side. Hargrove's defenders, mostly far-right commentators and police unions, painted him as a victim of a woke mob. They claimed Jasmine had provoked him, that she'd used her status to humiliate a hard-working officer. Some even sent her threats, which her team quietly handed over to the FBI. Through it all, Jasmine remained unshaken. "They can call me whatever they want," she told her best friend, Aisha, over coffee one morning. "I've been called worse. What they can't do is stop me." Aisha, a social worker who'd known Jasmine since their college days, shook her head. "You're a force, Jas, but you need to rest. You can't carry this whole movement on your shoulders." "I'm not," Jasmine said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I've got Oak Cliff behind me, I've got those kids, I've got you, that's enough." The incident in Oak Cliff didn't just spark a national conversation. It galvanized the community in ways no one could have predicted. In the days following the slap, Greater Zion Baptist Church became a hub of activity. Volunteers poured in, offering everything from legal advice to homemade meals for the families affected by the incident. Malik and his friends, once shy and reserved, found their voices, speaking at rallies and sharing their stories with the media. One of the girls, 15-year-old Tiana, had been particularly shaken by the encounter. She was a quiet, studious kid with dreams of becoming a doctor, but Hargrove's aggression had left her questioning her place in the world. "I didn't even do anything," she told Jasmine during one of their counseling sessions, her voice trembling. "I was just standing there, and he looked at me like I was nothing." Jasmine knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "You're not nothing, Tiana, you're everything. You're the future. And what happened to you? It's not your fault, it's his. And we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Tiana nodded, tears streaming down her face, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. Over the next few weeks, she and the other teens became the heart of the movement in Oak Cliff. They organized a youth march, drawing hundreds of kids from across Dallas to demand safer communities. They started a petition for body cameras to be mandatory for all Dallas police officers, collecting over 10,000 signatures in a single week. And they began working with future leaders of Oak Cliff to create a mentorship program for younger kids, ensuring they'd have role models who understood their struggles. Jasmine watched their growth with a mix of pride and awe. She'd always believed in the power of community, but seeing it in action, seeing these kids transform their pain into purpose, reminded her why she'd gotten into politics in the first place. She made a point to attend every event they organized, often bringing along other elected officials to amplify their voices. "This isn't my movement," she told a crowd at the youth march, her arm around Tiana. "It's theirs. I'm just here to help." But the community's response wasn't all positive. Some residents, particularly older ones who'd always supported the police, felt torn. They understood the need for reform, but worried that the protests were painting all officers with the same brush. One evening, at a town hall meeting organized by Pastor Watkins, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Henderson stood up, her voice trembling. "I've lived in Oak Cliff my whole life," she said. "I've known good cops who helped my son when he was struggling, who checked on me after my husband passed. I don't want to see them hurt by this." Jasmine listened carefully, then walked over to Mrs. Henderson, taking her hand. "I hear you," she said, "and I don't want to see good officers hurt either. But we can't ignore the bad ones. We can't pretend that what happened to those kids, what happened to me, is okay. We need a system that holds everyone accountable so the good cops can do their jobs without being tainted by the bad ones." Mrs. Henderson nodded, her eyes glistening. "I just want us to stay united," she said softly. "We will," Jasmine promised. "That's what Oak Cliff does." 6 months later, Hargrove's trial became a national spectacle. The prosecution, bolstered by the viral video and dozens of witness testimonies, argued that his actions were not only criminal, but emblematic of a culture of impunity. The defense leaned heavily on Hargrove's record, 20 years on the force, multiple commendations, and tried to frame Jasmine as an aggressor who'd escalated the situation. Jasmine took the stand on the third day, her presence commanding the courtroom. She recounted the incident with clarity and conviction, her voice never wavering. When the defense attorney suggested she'd antagonized Hargrove, she didn't miss a beat. If asking questions and standing up for kids is antagonizing, then I'll antagonize every day of my life, she said. The courtroom buzzed, and the judge had to call for order. But the trial wasn't just about Hargrove's actions that day. The prosecution brought in evidence of his history, complaints from civilians that had been dismissed, allegations of excessive force that had never been investigated, and a pattern of targeting young Black and Latino men in Oak Cliff. One witness, a 22-year-old named Carlos, testified that Hargrove had once slammed him against a wall for looking suspicious while he was walking home from work. "He told me I didn't belong in his neighborhood," Carlos said, his voice shaking. "I was born here." Hargrove, for his part, took the stand in his own defense. He claimed he'd been overwhelmed by the crowd, that Jasmine's aggressive tone had made him feel threatened. But under cross-examination, his story fell apart. The prosecutor played the video of the incident, pausing at the moment he raised his hand to slap Jasmine. "Does this look like the action of a man who felt threatened?" the prosecutor asked. Hargrove had no answer. The trial wasn't just about Hargrove. It was a referendum on power, privilege, and accountability. When the jury returned a guilty verdict on assault and misconduct charges, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Hargrove was sentenced to 2 years in prison, a modest punishment, but a rare one for a police officer. Outside the courthouse, Jasmine addressed a crowd of supporters. "This is a start," she said, "not the end. We keep fighting until every community is safe, every voice is heard, and every badge is held accountable." The trial may have ended, but the movement it sparked was just beginning. The slap in Oak Cliff became a rallying cry for activists across the country. In cities like Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles, protests demanded systemic change. Grassroots organizations, many led by young people inspired by Malik, Tiana, and their friends, began working together, sharing strategies and resources. A coalition called Justice Now emerged, with chapters in all 50 states, pushing for federal legislation to address police misconduct. Jasmine, now a national figure, threw herself into the fight. She traveled the country, speaking at rallies, meeting with families who'd lost loved ones to police violence, and testifying before Congress. She co-sponsored the Justice in Policing Act, a landmark bill that banned chokeholds, restricted no-knock warrants, and established a national database of police misconduct. The bill faced fierce opposition from law enforcement unions and conservative lawmakers. But Jasmine's coalition, bolstered by public pressure and the viral video, kept the momentum alive. Back in Dallas, the city implemented its own reforms. The Dallas Police Department, under a new chief who'd been appointed in the wake of the scandal, introduced stricter use of force policies, mandated de-escalation training, and created a civilian oversight board with real power. They also partnered with future leaders of Oak Cliff to create a youth liaison program, ensuring that kids like Malik and Tiana had a direct line to the department to voice their concerns. But change didn't come without resistance. Some officers, feeling scapegoated, staged a blue flu walkout, refusing to show up for their shifts in protest of the reforms. The walkout lasted 3 days, leaving parts of the city vulnerable and fueling tensions. Jasmine and the new police chief held a joint press conference, urging the officers to return while reaffirming their commitment to accountability. "We don't want to vilify the police," Jasmine said. "We want to work with them, but that means they have to work with us, honestly, transparently, and respectfully." The walkout eventually ended, and the reforms held. Over the next year, Dallas saw a 15% decrease in use of force incidents, a statistic that made national headlines. Other cities began to take notice, and the Dallas model became a blueprint for reform efforts nationwide. For all her public strength, the fight took a toll on Jasmine. The threats against her escalated after the trial, forcing her to increase her security detail. She received hate mail, some of it so vile that her staff stopped showing it to her. One letter, written in jagged handwriting, promised to make her pay for what she'd done to Hargrove. Another included a photo of her mother's house, a clear message that her family wasn't safe. Jasmine tried to brush it off, but the stress was undeniable. She wasn't sleeping well, her dreams haunted by the sound of the slap, the roar of the crowd, the weight of the movement on her shoulders. One night, she woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, and called Aisha. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It's too much." Aisha was quiet for a moment, then said, "You don't have to do it alone, Jas. You've got us. You've got the kids. You've got your mom. Let us carry some of this for you." The next day, Jasmine took a rare day off. She drove to her mother's house, a small bungalow on the edge of Oak Cliff, and spent the afternoon in the kitchen, helping Loretta make her famous peach cobbler. They talked about everything and nothing: the weather, the neighbor's new dog, the recipe for the cobbler's crust. For a few hours, Jasmine felt like a daughter again, not a congresswoman or a movement leader. It was exactly what she needed. Loretta, sensing her daughter's exhaustion, pulled her into a hug as the cobbler baked. "I'm proud of you, baby," she said. "But don't forget to take care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup." Jasmine nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "I won't, Mama, I promise." A year after the slap, Jasmine stood at Greater Zion Baptist Church, celebrating the anniversary of the back-to-school drive. The parking lot was once again filled with music, laughter, and the smell of barbecue. But this time, the energy was different. There was a sense of triumph, of resilience, of hope. Malik, Tiana, and the other teens were there, now confident leaders in their own right, helping younger kids pick out backpacks and sharing their stories with anyone who'd listen. Jasmine looked out at the crowd, kids laughing, families united, and activists planning the next steps. The bruise on her cheek had long faded, but the fire in her heart burned brighter than ever. She thought about the changes they'd achieved, the reforms in Dallas, the national legislation, the youth programs that were giving kids a voice. She thought about the families who'd reached out to her, thanking her for giving them hope, for showing them that change was possible. "This is what we do," she said, her voice carrying over the music and chatter. "We stand up, we speak out, and we win together." The crowd roared, and Jasmine smiled. She'd taken a slap and turned it into a revolution, and she was just getting started.